Let's dye this Allbirds 100% merino wool sweater a beautiful, brilliant color. The first step is to weigh the garment. This is the exact same sweater, just a different color. I then added the sweater to a bucket of lukewarm water mixed with some Synthropol, which is made by Dharma Trading Co. This is what the Synthropol detergent looks like. The purpose of this is really just to remove any kind of fixatives, chemicals, or other stuff from the factory. And I let that sit overnight in the Synthropol soaking. The next day, here I am just washing out the remaining Synthropol from the sweater. Then we're going to measure out the appropriate amount of citric acid. My sweater weighs just over a pound. I'm actually going to use 2 tablespoons to be safe. Now we're going to do the same exact thing, only with the ammonium sulfate. Again, I used about 2 tablespoons just to be safe. Here's where things get a little math intense. To get the right dye color, you need to use between 1/4 and 1/3 of an ounce per pound of dry fabric weight, or 2 to 4% of the dry weight of the fabric in dye powder. So if your fabric weighs 1 pound, you can use about an ounce of dye, and you need to weigh this out using a scale to be accurate. I want a deeper, richer color, so I went with a little bit over an ounce, closer to 1.25 ounces. So now, at this stage, you should have 3 separate jars with 3 different powders in them, and make sure they're all clearly labeled. For this next part, you're going to want the largest possible vessel you have that you're willing to get dirty with dye. In this case, I'm using a 15-gallon 60-quart pot by Ballington. I got this from a restaurant supply place. So I only put the sweater in there just to give you an idea of the scale, but we're actually going to set this aside for now because it doesn't go in until later. We're now going to fill the pot up with water, and I would only go about halfway if you're using a pot this big, just because it's going to be really difficult to lift to the stove. I actually had to have a friend help me get this on top of the stove because it was so heavy. You can absolutely use a smaller pot. This is just all I happen to have on hand, and make sure you do not get an aluminum pot. Now you're going to add some hot water directly from the tap to your ammonium sulfate, and you're going to go ahead and put the lid on and shake the heck out of it. Make sure it's fully dissolved. Repeat this process with your dye powder. Add some hot water to the dye, securely attach the lid, and shake vigorously. You're going to put the pot on the stove now and turn the heat on. Turn it as high as it'll go. Now you're going to go ahead and you're going to add that pre-dissolved ammonium sulfate to the pot, and then you're also going to add the pre-dissolved dye powder to the pot. And then you're going to stir those both extremely well, and then you're going to add, very carefully, your pre-wetted garment. At this stage, the pot shouldn't be too hot, so it's okay if your garment is a little cool. And we're going to keep checking the temperature periodically to see where we're at. The goal is to get the temperature up to at least 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and ideally maintaining between 185 and 200. It's been about 15 minutes and it's only at 140. About 30 minutes later, we're getting closer to 160. After about 40 minutes, we're now at about 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Getting close. After an hour, we're finally at our target of 200 degrees. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and kill the heat. Now I'm going to take that citric acid that I've been saving and I'm going to add some hot water to it, doesn't matter how much, and I'm going to go ahead and shake it. Then I'm going to add that dissolved citric acid to the dye bath and stir vigorously. The goal of the citric acid is to exhaust the remaining dye in the dye bath. Then I just let everything cool overnight, and I just left the sweater in the pot like this. And this is what it looked like the next day. Most all of the dye is exhausted and the water is mostly clear. I removed the sweater and then I went ahead and I rolled it up in a towel and I squeezed out a lot of the excess water and I laid it flat to dry. Here's what it looks like afterwards, although it's still wet. Here's the finished product. Overall, I'm very satisfied with how it came out. It's a very vibrant green and it looks like it got dyed pretty evenly. And that's all thanks to the slow acid releasing properties of ammonium sulfate.